First question is, since Nollywood is second in the world in terms of sectoral size, can we say that Nigerian cinema dominates Africa and even speaks on behalf of the African continent and undertakes to tell the stories of the continent?
Okay, there's more than one question there.
Total question. Actually, Nollywood is a big sector for African continent, and Nollywood does undertake to tell the stories of the continent.
I don't think at the moment. I don't think we're telling the stories of the continent. I think Nollywood arose out of a need to entertain Nigerians. So the Nigerian cinema industry initially was started, post-colonial times, and that was so the early guys around that time, who showed us celluloid. Then we had in the 80s we had a kind of economic problem. Then that meant film labs couldn't process film anymore. So that really ruined that time of cinema, because in those days people used to go watch films in the cinema, and they would watch Nigerian films as well as films from India, China, and we had filmmakers like Herbert Ogunde, who used to make films, and those films were largely Nigerian films. At that time too, our television industry was very powerful. Nigeria, NTA Badon was the first. I think it was the first African. No, it wasn't African. I think from below the Sahara down. We had the first TV channel, yeah, not in all of Africa, but I know from mostly West African countries all the way down to South Africa. So we've always had a lot of people who were in entertainment, who were making films. Now, when that, and of course a lot of people in those days, were trained, because NTV, but that's the title of the channel. NTV Badon had this collaboration with the BBC, and a lot of professionals then were trained, and things were good until our economy kind of went down in the 80s. Then what now happened was sometime towards the 90s, Nollywood arose because there were merchants who were importing videotapes and empty blank cassettes, and normally what they would do is they would just record any kind of content that they had from somewhere else and sell those VHS tapes to the market. And they employed someone who used to be working in the television station, and he gave them a script for a Nigerian film. And I think that was the first, I think it was Living in Bondage, that was the title of the film. And that was the first Nollywood movie that was made. So there's a time when we had Nigerian cinema, then the economy, had this problem. So Nollywood arose out of a need to entertain Nigerian audiences. So what I was trying I was trying to lead up to how we tell stories. So I was trying to give you some context, some background, because in colonial times, there were television stations. So and all of that has fed into the Nigerian cinema. Then once people didn't have access to resources, which was mostly in pounds, because back then I think there was only one film laboratory that was working in Nigeria, and after the economic crisis, that died, and you had to go and process your film outside the country. Now, when the VHS, when the tape, the videotape era came in, people found a way to make entertainment much quicker, and because the merchants who were commissioning these projects, because all these films were being commissioned by merchants who were trying to sell a product. So the stories that they were making were stories that were around them. So that's why we can't honestly say we are telling stories of the African continent. What has happened, however, because the distribution of Nollywood films has gone so far and wide, you now have a lot of people taking on some elements that they've seen in Nollywood films. So it's been an influence of sorts in the way the films are made. Sometimes the speed, sometimes the expressions, and I think it's also gotten Africans to see themselves as different people, because I believe when Nollywood films became really, really popular, I used to travel to South Africa a lot then, and I would meet people who used to talk about Nigerian Nollywood celebrities like they were, really superstars. And I wasn't in Nollywood. I wasn't in Nollywood films then. I was in advertising, so I didn't really think too much of it. I was like, oh, okay. So I said, how do you get to see the films? Oh, they said that when they go to they get the films from the Nigerians in markets, and they're like, no, they really like this person. So the influence of what they perceive Nigerians to be was spreading, and in some African countries that were not as liberal or as enfranchised as we were, seeing Nigerians, do certain things, made them also think, okay, I could be that kind of African too, but I could be a rich prince, I could be a rich princess. So it helped their fantasy, which is sort of the same way American films affect us as well. You could see, I'd love to be a Rambo, I'd love to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I think that's the influence we've had, but I don't think we're telling stories. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have now taken the Nollywood model of making films and they've developed it for their own markets as well. So, quick turnaround, shoot very quickly, shoot digital, and make it as quick as you can and try and deliver it to a platform. That's a business model for many in other parts of Africa right now. But they're telling their own stories in their own languages and for their own people.
Yes, like countries now. And second question is, what do you think about Nollywood's sociological and cultural mission within the country, Africa and the world? Like sociological and cultural mission, like Africa, country, and to the world.
I think I sort of answered that. So there are two parts to this side of the story. Nigerians by nature can be very self-critical. So a lot of people used to say, oh, Nollywood films dwell too much into fantasy, spiritual things, that sometimes you have stories of witches, etc., 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 and those stories do not portray modern Nigeria. Now, the thing is, most of these stories were developed for a different audience. So there are different audiences in Nigeria. My mother, for instance, loves to watch basic Nollywood films that are like morality tales. Good girl meets bad guy does something bad, but good girl wins at the end. Yeah, she likes things that tied up neatly. If a story starts off this way, it must end this way, and it's enough. She doesn't want to watch a 90-minute long movie about character struggle against the odds. Certainly doesn't like the violence. Now, the different audiences, Nigerians, our theater. I'm a Nigerian, but I'm Yoruba, so the Yoruba have a very rich theater culture. So our theater culture goes back. It's like goes back to the days where people would go from town to town, and they would perform plays without any kind of stage or anything. They'll just do it in a village. So we're used to stories that tell us about the struggles of people and their morality tales. They encourage us to do better. I'm sure some other cultures in Nigeria have it, but I know this is very popular with Yoruba people. Now, people say, what are the sociological contexts? There are different audiences for different kinds of films. So if you talk about Nollywood today is now very modern. It's now in different categories because the cinema culture is now back in Nigeria. They're trying to build multiplexes. So people are trying to make films that can bring people into the multiplexes. And Nigerians are also trying to make films that are traveling out of Nigeria. So these stories from the old Nollywood, where they said, Nollywood films are like that, those stories don't really exist like that anymore. People are making more complex narratives now. And they're certainly trying to make films that work in a place of better storytelling. I know this year, the two Nigerians have both their films opening at Toronto International Film Industry. One is a colleague and a friend of mine. His name is Abba Makama. Another one is Michael Gokin. And if you can, you should Google and check out the trailer to Abba Makama's Lost Okoroshi. The title of the film is The Lost Okoroshi. And it's a very, very interesting look at, it's a play on what we think of as the ancestors, and the ancestors meet modern life in Lagos. So it's a very, very interesting, I haven't seen any film being done like that. I think it's a very inventive kind of film. And it's getting very good reviews outside the country. And their colleagues that are doing films that have gotten funding. We're now beginning to do films that are taking us back to some of our traditional roots. There are filmmakers like C.J. Obasi that are making films called Mami Water. Mami Water is a name, it's like not African, it's actually a name for mermaids. And in our culture, mermaids are not sweet, precious little things in the ocean. They're very powerful supernatural beings. They can ruin your destiny. So those are the themes being explored. So there's been a movement forward because from telling simple stories of human interaction, here and there, and we're beginning to see people doing more complex films. And there've been quite a few complex films. There are even modern films. There's films like The Setup by Ni Akimonayo. So if you do come to Lagos today and you come to the cinema, you're likely to see much more modern films. Now, I don't know whether these films are having strong impact across Africa, like the old Nollywood films did. The films that were in the 2000s. The 2000s were like the glory days of old Nollywood, where our films were being shipped across Africa, are being dubbed into different languages. But I think
is related actually. In 2000s, Nollywood changed and made a transformation, especially in professionalism and technical possibilities and storytelling. And can you describe us 2000s Nollywood films and possibilities to making film?
Okay, so there are two different, like I said again, they're different markets. So if a regular person, I've been to Turkey before, so I know, I've seen some of your films. I don't understand what they're saying, but it's pretty. You guys have been making films for quite a while. You know, you're practically like an European, film industry. Sometimes you make films for like foreign film festivals that are very high-minded. Then you have films you make for people who don't really care about arts and all that. They just want a simple story. Yeah. So for many years, Nollywood, because Nollywood addressed the needs of the general populace. So the stories Nollywood told were very simple stories because they made money from people renting DVDs, renting VCDs or VHS tapes. So the industry didn't need to go higher. There are a couple of filmmakers that tried to do high-minded things, but it didn't really work. But the industry that Nigeria made came from the films that happened at that level, and was on top of that, filmmakers started coming in, started adding in, more professionalism, as people felt that they demanded. So it was in 2000s that you started to see the rise of people adding, and around the 2000s was when it was the late 2000s. Kule Afolayan, I think Kule Afolayan was an early pioneer in revolutionizing Nollywood movies. So Kule Afolayan, if you Google him and check out his films, he started bringing in modernism into into the films. There have been other filmmakers before them, but I think it really came together, the storytelling and the vision, and the cinematography, everything all came together, I think, in his film.
What I want to do, to answer that question, I want to give you a list of films over the past couple of years, because it will help, it might help you as you do your research, and you might also be able to look at other directors as well. So there's been a lot of, in the old films, like I said to you, there's an element of fantasy. And I think the best I can use as comparison is like when I've been to Arabic countries, right? And I'm switching channels, like I was saying, there are different types of content, right? So there are channels that do ancient films of people fighting with scimitars, with turbans that show, and they seem like lower end productions. Then you have very, very modern films with spies and international intrigue, but it's in Arabic or Turkish or any other language. I think where we are, like a lot of Nollywood films, if you watch a lot of core Nollywood movies, some are either set in the village or some are set in cities. And those are they're often made for general consumption, often made at budgets that are, not very high, and they're made to be made quickly and turned out for people to digest quickly. So people just want to watch a movie, have a few laughs, then go back to what they're doing. The films that are representing what Nollywood is right now, the films that have traveled and the filmmakers that are making them, are the films I think I would like to just give you a list of. I've mentioned a few names. There are two female directors that have made really important films this year. One is Tope Oshin, and she made a film called Up North, which was different from most films because it talked about a spoiled rich guy that's placed up in a different part of Nigeria, and we got to see a different side of Nigeria. There's another film made by another filmmaker called Kemi Adetiba, and she made a film called
King of Boys, which is about a female gangster running the underworld. So there's a variety of storytelling that's so different now. And then paradoxically, you have Abba's film, which is a mixture of fantasy and urban, The Lost Okoroshi, that's in TIFF. So it's the application of it is nuanced. There's a nuance in how it's applied. The films are more gritty and realistic. They also feel good movies. We have wedding films were very, very popular because Nigerians like weddings. We had The Wedding Party 1, Wedding Party 2, and people liked those films because it showed Nigerians in all their flamboyance and elegance. So we're always shifting and we're changing. No, the Wedding Party films have no magical elements. They're just telling stories of Nigerians. In what they do on every Saturday or every weekend. So the fantastical elements, I came from our old theatrical background, and it came from the times when we were, the guys that started Nollywood were mostly television people. So if I can use your industry, if for instance, God forbid, the guys in Turkey had an economic problem, God forbid, and the guys at the television level that made only video now became the only guys that were still making films at Turkey's level. Suddenly became the guys that were making all the films. Those films do not accurately represent.
They are making these films for audience, actually, not art concerns.
No. If the arts and cultural filmmakers are at a different level, the understanding of film and theater is also different. But at the same time, the guys that built the industry, that created the product for the Nigerian audience to like, were the guys that made Nollywood. So they can't do without each other.
Yeah,
so
like both exist. And actually, unlike other countries' film industries, Nigeria has a formidable waves of women as producers, directors, actors. What are the reasons for this? Like women are actually so phenomenal, like in Nigerian cinema, like directors, producers, actors, unlike the other countries' film industries. Like what are the reasons for this?
It's been it's a very interesting question. I've actually I don't really have, because I remember when in the old Nollywood, men were more of the producers. Like, as in the Nollywood of the 90s to the 2000s had mostly men, as was a very male-dominated field. And today you have more female producers, or you have more notable female producers than male producers that are leading the charge, so to speak. I think some of it has been the focus and commitment of women in the industry. I think I tend to see that there's been a lot of strong commitment and focus for women in the industry. From some of my friends that I've seen, women have gone about it with a very strong level of commitment. And I think the skill level is also high. Nowadays, I think they're more, the men are creative, but there are even more female directors today than there were before. But in terms of production, you have a lot of strong women producers out there. Some of them come with their own money, so they were already in other sectors and they did rather well, and they decided to come and play in Nollywood with their own investment. Some have been long time
and outstanding producers who have been at the game for quite a while, but they stuck at it. And over time, they just acquired way more knowledge, and they keep going forward. So I think it's quite a level playing field. At least there are a lot of quality female producers out there, and equally quality female directors out there.
And what do you think the themes of New Wave will evolve into in Nigeria? New Wave will evolve, like what will they in New Wave, like themes, like other
a new wave.
Mm-hmm.
Like a new generation of filmmakers.
Like and new wave in filmmaking cinema, like in France.
Yeah, I know about new wave filmmakers. I understand. So they're like I said to you, like Nollywood is not one thing. It's several kinds of filmmakers. There's several kinds. I come into filmmaking from advertising. So I already understood international production before I came into Nollywood. I started directing in 2008. And I had the opportunity to have traveled around the world to see how stuff was done. But I've also met filmmakers who trained outside the country, who understand principles, who are also working in the industry. There are Nigerian filmmakers who are self-taught and are making films. So the best way to understand where the new wave is coming is to study the Nigerian filmmaking sector. We don't make one kind of film. We don't. There's a collective all over the country. There are different collectives. Then in the northern Nigeria, we call it Nollywood. The northerners make films for themselves. You have filmmakers from Jos who shoot very poetic films. In Lagos, there's a Lagos film sector which is vibrant, which is full of all kinds of urban stories. There are people down south who are also making their own kind of films. But there's not been one single place, where you can go and take a look at what's really happening. So from outside, it may look like Nigerians only make one kind of film, but we make different kinds, different languages too. And they're very, very, if you want high-end films, great. If you want comedy, there are people that are doing comedic stuff. If you want think pieces, like I said, there are filmmakers from Lagos that are screening films in Toronto as we speak. So there are different kinds of filmmakers, and we'll all find our way. So I think there's going to be another generation right after this one, because there are lots of really young filmmakers that are already coming out, people in their 20s who are very rebellious, and they're likely to evolve and bring a different language to this, and just going to say, okay, no, I don't want to show Lagos this way. I don't want to show my hometown this way. I want people to see this of us. And as far as they're careful about how they put those films out there, they're careful about what they're saying. They have to be saying something. I wish them all the best of luck. We will all continue making films for quite a while. We've been asking the government to really step in. Piracy is the biggest problem. That it doesn't help people make their money back. People invest quite a lot into making a film, because filmmaking in Nigeria is quite costly, especially if you're making a film in Lagos. Location rentals, and to try and get your money back, the only way for you to get your money back these days is you have to put it through a cinema run, for which you have to get advertising for, and barely has your film gone into the cinemas that you see people hawking the DVDs on the street. So it's hurt a lot of filmmakers, and because people don't go to watch the film in the cinemas, and the filmmaker can't recoup their cinema takes, then you hopefully hope you're able to sell it to a platform. So what they've been trying to do is to get the government to actually regulate that, and I think there's some headway being made, but as yet we're still expecting something to be done. If the government really gets involved and there's stiff penalties for being caught with pirated material of any kind, then there should be stiff penalties. Once that's done, that'll be easy.
Yes. Thank you for interview. Like our questions done. Like
okay.
Our questions finished. Like
Good.
thank you for answers.
Okay, are you satisfied? Okay, please.